welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Just finished up talking some college basketball for the day. Now we're going to be getting into the NBA, but not on games itself, but the scandal that is coming out about the Toronto Raptors' Jontay Porter, who is being investigated for potentially fixing games. There was a story that came out from Adrian Wojnarowski of ESPN about Porter potentially being involved in some irregularities in gambling, where there were two specific days on January 26th and March 20th where the highest, most profitable bets of the day, player prop bets that is, were on Jontay Porter unders. In both of these games, he ended up coming out and only played a few minutes, so he was eligible that the props would not get voided, but he wasn't on the court to, not necessarily, because when you look at this, you think about throwing games where it is purposefully doing bad. It wasn't that. There wasn't anything, if you look back at those games, there wasn't anything glaring about how Porter actually played that would indicate, if we didn't have this story, that, oh, he's trying to throw this right now. But the fact that he left both of these games with various ailments that are sort of undiagnosable to some degree, where it was a re-aggravation of an eye injury in one of them, and it was an illness in the other. So definitely a bit strange here. Does not look good for Porter. I mean, it's interesting how this all plays out because of the fact that Jontay Porter is on a two-way contract. Well, also, let's just start with this. The fact of, because again, I don't want to say all these things, put the blame on Porter, but not explain why this is so fishy, outside of the fact as well that he left both of these games. We're talking about Jontay Porter here. He is a player for the Toronto Raptors that is on a two-way contract and is getting under 15 minutes a game on the season. Now, if you are watching the Raptors, which I don't think that all that many people really are, they are down in the standings and are just sort of playing out the rest of the season for the sake of it. I know that they are trying because they don't have their own draft pick, but they're really in a rebuilding scenario here. Porter has been getting some more playing time for the Raptors this season, where he's played in 26 games. He's been getting some more minutes down the stretch. But again, it's kind of hard to say that this is a full coincidence that a player in Jontay Porter, who the majority of NBA fans probably don't really know of. You might know him because of the fact that he's Michael Porter Jr.'s brother, but ultimately he's not a high-profile player to the point where you have these stories that DraftKings had reported on the day after, that there were bets upwards of $10,000 on Jontay Porter's unders. A sane person would not do something like that. Now, again, that's sort of speculation there, but I can't imagine that people would really be throwing all this money on a two-way player that, again, just does not have that much name recognition as a whole. So it is definitely a very sketchy situation here for Porter. Now, he's being investigated. Nothing's fully been confirmed, but it was the fact that DraftKings reported on both of these occasions on January 26th and March 20th that Jontay Porter prop bets under were the most profitable bet of the day. Adrian Wojnarowski also put out that at least one other U.S. sportsbook detected unusual betting interest on Porter props. So, he also added to this same tweet saying that it was upwards of $10,000 and $20,000, which, again, is just an absurd amount of money to be putting on a rotational player like that. So it does not look good for him. Again, it's one thing when they're playing the games. It's way harder, obviously, to... No, I don't think any player could get away with fully throwing a game, actually being on the court to make that happen. But in these instances, the fact that Porter got on the court, gave some effort for a little bit, and then left the game with again, not a major injury, it just does not look good as a whole. We don't know anything definitively yet. I'm sure we'll get answers, but this does sort of take me into the bigger conversation about athletes potentially gambling. It's one of these things where I do feel like there is a portion of the... Not so much the media, but just NBA fans in general who say, well, the NBA promotes all of these betting books, and it's not just the NBA, it's really across America as a whole, all of these leagues, because they can make money from gambling, so they're promoting it. Well, why can't their athletes participate in it themselves? And to me, it's simple. It's just because those are the rules. It leads to a potentially slippery slope where you can have instances of throwing games, and it can ruin the credibility and integrity of the sport as a whole if you start playing these games. You can say that it's unfair that these players aren't able to, gamble on themselves and on the sports as a whole, but the reality is they're benefiting anyways from all of these sponsorships, because the fact that we have all of these sports books paying as much money as they are to be advertised by the leagues, it's helping to pay their contracts and their salaries, and they're getting a piece of it to some degree. No, you're not betting yourself and seeing those results come up in front of you, but at the same time, you can't go, a handful of years while you're in the league without gambling. You have such a finite time period that you are able to play a professional sport at the level of an NFL, an MLB, an NBA, any of those lines. And it's just one of the bylaws of the league. And to the argument that, well, all of these leagues are promoting it, so how it's too difficult for these players to, stay away from it. I don't really believe that these athletes that are getting caught with these gambling scandals are gambling just for the sake of, oh, well, I saw an ad on TV when I was watching an NBA game, or along those lines. It's because gambling is something that's been happening for, a lot of the entirety of sports as a whole. And I don't think that they're inspired just because an ad looks so cool that they want to get involved with it. It's the fact that gambling has been a very real thing in the sports world for a handful of years now, for decades really, and now because of the fact that it is regulated so much more and controlled through technology, that they're just getting caught easier than they ever have before. Which does sort of spark an interesting conversation as to how much do we think that professional athletes could have been gambling before all of this was regulated, and are there stories that we'll never know about? That's very possible, but it's just stupid for these athletes who are making, by the way, Jontay Porter, he's on a 2-way contract like I mentioned. I believe his contract is still over $400,000 a year. Let me double check that as we speak here, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case, that he's making this much money. His brother is Michael Porter Jr. He comes from a family where their dad is, or at least was, I'm not sure if he's still with Missouri. It's been a rough stretch for them. Yeah, $411,000 for Jontay Porter on a 2-way contract, let alone being an actual full-time NBA player. And it just doesn't make sense to me why you would risk, especially betting on your own sport. And as it currently stands, the idea is that it wasn't he himself making these bets, but it was telling other people to bet on him, and maybe he gets a cut of it. Again, that's all speculation. I don't want to necessarily say anything untrue in that scenario, but there's just no need to sort of... that's about as dirty as it gets, as sort of throwing the unders on your own props. It's almost better if he's betting on his own over and he's trying to stat pad, as much as that would still be a big concern as well. That's what we saw with Pete Rose, the MLB manager, who was banned from baseball because he used to bet on the Cincinnati Reds, whom he managed. He used to bet on them winning games, and that has kept him banned from the game of baseball altogether. You talk about betting on your own unders and taking yourself out of a game because of that. I don't think that there's any option for the NBA other than to suspend him for life. In reality, it's not forgivable in my eyes, and I'm sure for his teammates as well, it's such a slap in the face to them, where, granted, it's not like Jontay Porter is a centerpiece of that Raptors team, but you go into the game with a game plan, and all of a sudden your teammate essentially quits on you because he's trying to help his friends out to make some money. So it's a horrendous look. I think that, again, as we find out more details about this, we can have more definitive statements, but I do think it looks really damning as things currently stand. And if he is guilty, his NBA career is over, which is just, again, I don't think that there's that much of an argument for the idea of athletes being able to bet on their own sport. I just can't really understand how anybody really gets behind that. If that's how you feel, so be it. But one way or another, the fact is the fact that it is the rule, and to risk throwing away your entire career at such a young age is a really stupid thing to do. And it is very discouraging. The NBA is going to definitely be looking into this, and we will keep you updated on all of the updates as they come out. But on that note, we are going to be taking our final break of the show. When we come back, we are going to be diving into the NFL and the rules that have come out of the owners' meeting. So stick with us, and we will be right back.